Meanwhile, the movie begins in Brooklyn, where Amanda and Clay reside with their children in a lovely apartment. One morning, feeling dissatisfied with their current life, Amanda suggests renting a house outside the city to change things up. After a short discussion, she successfully persuades Clay to take a break from their routine. The family then packs their belongings and embarks on a vacation. When they arrive at their vacation home, the kids, Archie and Rose, excitedly jump into the pool. After the family settles in, Amanda heads out to the nearest grocery store to gather supplies for their trip. While loading the groceries into her car in the parking lot, Amanda smiled at a stranger who was loading enormous amounts of groceries, but he didn't return the friendly gesture. The family decides to go to the beach. While there, Rose notices a large ship that appears to be getting closer. While the rest of the family relaxes, Rose keeps watching the ship until it eventually runs aground. This causes everyone on the beach to leave and go back home. On their way home, Amanda realizes that the Wi-Fi is not working. She suggests resetting the router, but Clay points out that the TV has no signal either. They don't worry too much about it, and Clay prepares a nice family dinner. They enjoy the meal together. While the children are sleeping, Amanda and Clay enjoy a glass of wine to relax. Suddenly, they hear a knock on the door. When they open it, they are greeted by a man named George and his daughter, Ruth. George introduces himself as the owner of the house and reminds Amanda that they had communicated through email when she rented the place. George then explains to Amanda, who finds it hard to believe, that they were originally on their way back to the city, but had to turn around due to a power outage. Ruth adds that her dad has a knee problem, and they can't go back to their apartment on the 14th floor. They kindly asked if they could stay at the house given the circumstances. Amanda gets frustrated and tells George she doesn't want strangers staying in the house when her kids are sleeping upstairs. But George walks into the liquor cabinet, opens one of the drawers, brings out $1,000, and gives it to Clay to reimburse them for half of the week's pay. Amanda requests some private time to discuss the situation. She openly expresses her disbelief in their story and tells Clay that she doesn't trust anything they say. However, Clay, despite Amanda's skepticism, convinces her to give George and Ruth a chance. He assures her that if he gets a bad feeling about them, he will ask them to leave. Returning to the living room, George offers them a cocktail, which Clay accepts. Amanda then asks some questions and requests to see George's identification. George agrees but apologizes, explaining that he left his ID in his coat back in the city. While they are having the conversation, their discussion gets interrupted by Ruth opening the TV, and an emergency broadcast starts playing and declares a state of national emergency. Eventually, Amanda agrees to let George and Ruth stay, and they settle into the basement room, finally alone. Ruth expresses to George that they need to find a way to get the family out of the house. However, George reminds her that scaring them won't be effective. He suggests that they should make the family feel like everything will be all right. Concerned about what is happening outside, Ruth asks her father if he has received any updates from his client. George tells her that they can't make any assumptions or speculations at this point. Upstairs, Amanda, unable to sleep, expresses her continued disbelief in George and Ruth. She mentions that there should be at least one photo of them in the house, but Clay reminds her that renters often remove family photos for privacy reasons. The next morning, Rose wakes Amanda, complaining that she can't watch the season finale of Friends because the Wi-Fi still isn't working. Amanda advises her daughter to wait until Clay wakes up. Amanda checks her phone and sees news alerts indicating that the power outage was caused by hackers. Seeing his wife's frustration, Clay decides to go back to town to find a newspaper and talk to people who might have more information about the situation. Meanwhile, Rose asks her dad to fix the TV, but becomes frustrated when she finds out he can't. She goes outside and sits by the pool. While there, Rose notices a large group of deer standing silently throughout the property, which makes her feel uneasy. Ruth wakes up and has a conversation with Amanda. Amanda shares the news alert with Ruth. George asks about Clay's whereabouts and learns that he went into town to gather more information. George agrees that it's a good idea and mentions that he will check with their neighbors who live a few miles away to see if they have any information about the situation. When Amanda leaves, Ruth voices her concern about the safety of her mom, wondering if her flight has landed safely. George reassures his daughter and tells her the flight probably just got diverted. George then drives to the neighbor's house with a gun in hand. George goes into the neighbor's house and notices that it's in shambles. After looking around, he goes to the basement and finds a satellite phone, which sadly still doesn't have a signal. Clay gets lost because of the malfunctioning GPS and runs into a terrified woman who only speaks Spanish. Unable to understand the distressed woman, Clay decides to drive away. On his way back, he sees a drone and, terrified of what might come, drives in reverse to get away, but realizes that it is only dropping leaflets that were for some reason written in Arabic. Driven by Rose's curiosity, she and Archie venture into the woods woods and come across a small shack. Archie notices a man-shaped imprint on the leaves, indicating that someone who stayed there had recently left. George goes out back to investigate more of the neighbor's house that had access to the beach and notices a dead body and what was left of a plane wreckage. Before he was able to fully take in what he was seeing, another plane crashed and George narrowly managed to save his life. After coming back to the house, GH shares with Amanda what he saw and experienced. He explains that the satellite phone at the neighbor's place was functional, but it couldn't find a signal. From this, he concludes that there might be a problem with the satellite connections across the entire country. Before the conversation ends, they hear a loud shrill that breaks the windows and sends everyone into a painful frenzy. Amid the chaos, Amanda realizes that the kids are no longer by the pool and runs to the woods and gets the kids. After sending the kids upstairs, Amanda questions George in the hopes of understanding what he thinks is going on. Although George tries to calm her down, Amanda baggers him in an attempt to get more information and tells him that she hasn't believed a word he has said since they came in. After the outburst, Amanda realizes that the man she saw stockpiling knew what would happen. When she mentions this, George describes the man and says his name is Danny, the contractor who built the house for him. Clay finally makes his way back home and shows them the pamphlet, which Archie reads as saying, "Death to America." Distressed by everything that transpired, Amanda and Clay decide to go back to the city and stay at Amanda's sister's house in New Jersey, even though George recommends against it. But on their way to the highway, they come across a sea of collided self-driving cars that had completely blocked the road. Before she can explain to the family, more cars start driving towards them, and Amanda manages to narrowly miss the first car, and they eventually make it back to the house. Ruth offers Clay a vape pen, and the two go out by the pool where she asks him provocative questions all night. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, George and Amanda get to know each other better and finally reach a middle ground when Amanda apologizes for her previous behavior. Amanda then asks why George came back to the house, and George tells of the story of a very powerful client he had who drunkenly told him how he could invite him to a meeting he's having with a bunch of other evil people that run the world. George then continues the story and tells Amanda the same client had him move around a lot of his money and told him to take care of himself a day before everything happened. Back in the yard, Clay confesses to Ruth about the woman he saw and the oil tanker. Before Ruth could process what he was saying, they heard a splash and they saw several flamingos swimming in the pool. A second round of the shrill noise hits, and this time the power goes out. Amanda and Clay take the kids to their room, and they all sleep together. Rose tells Amanda a story from a show she's seen where God tries to save a man with several warnings the man ignores until it's too late. Down in the basement, Ruth voices her distaste for having Amanda's family back in the house and warns her father not to trust people so easily. The next morning, when Archie wakes up, they notice that his teeth are loose and they started falling out. Archie tells them he had a tick bite the other day when he was in the woods. George calms Amanda down and tells her Danny, the construction manager, might have stocked up on antibiotics. But during all this, they realize that Rose is missing. Amanda runs off to find her, while George and Clay take Archie into the car in the hopes of finding medicine to treat whether he has. Ruth and Amanda look for Rose, but are unable to find her. They finally get to the shack, and the two have a conversation and find a common ground in their general distrust and apathy towards humanity. Once they reach Danny's house, he tells them he thinks there's a war going on and refuses to help them, stating that it's every man for himself now. Danny then loses his temper and tells them to go away with his shotgun loaded, but George refuses and points his gun back. During the standoff, Clay manages to appeal to Danny's humanity, and they manage to get antibiotics from him. Before they leave, Danny tells them it might be the Koreans and/or Chinese, and tells them that his friend received a pamphlet from drones the same way Clay did. He then recommends they check out the bunker one of his friends had built for George's wealthy neighbor. Back at the shack, as Ruth suddenly finds herself surrounded by a curious herd of deer, their gentle eyes and cautious movements create a surreal moment amid the wilderness. Sensing Ruth's unease, Amanda swiftly intervenes, using her commanding presence to shoo the deer away. With a few assertive gestures and a firm tone, she manages to disperse the inquisitive animals. In the car, before heading home, George explains how his client worked for the Department of Defense and tells Archie and Clay about a three-step maneuver the client talked about, which was designed to topple a government in the most effective way possible. As Amanda and Ruth venture deeper into the woods, they emerge into a clearing that offers a breathtaking panoramic view of the city below. Rose indulges herself in whatever junk food she can find in the neighbor's house. Eventually, as Amanda and Ruth deduce that she might be there and yell for her name, she notices the bunker and goes down to to find a fully stacked bunker that had everything people would need for survival. Beneath the TV set, amidst a clutter of assorted items, Rose's eyes land on a familiar DVD case. As she picks it up, a rush of excitement courses through her. It's the long-awaited seasonal finale of Friends. With a gleeful smile, she realizes that she can finally watch the ending of the beloved show. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.